Thank you so much for coming. I hope it wasn't as hard to get here as it was for us. I have to thank a couple people, mostly Deborah, for asking me to be here and consequently helping me see things in a new way. After all, that is why we photographers do what we do and never get bored. To my sister Dune for constantly raising the bar just out of reach. She's gone where angels fear to tread. To my sister Erin for being such an inspiration. She's a bit like the Pied Piper. People will follow her anywhere. To my third sister, in quotes, Stacy, who has weathered every storm, be it emotional or otherwise. To Jennifer and Allie for seeing the forest through the trees and telling it straight. To Bob for helping me navigate the everyday challenges of being a photographer. To Russell, my dear friend, for being the voice of reason. And to Mary Barr for making me such a beautiful website that even I must consult to know what I'm doing. When I was asked by Deborah to speak to you today, she said you were interested in my process. I thought I would show you some of my favorite images and how they relate to mine. Keep in mind that sometimes I'm thinking of other people's images while I'm making my own, but often it is in retrospect that I realize what might have informed my decisions. I work instinctively, reacting to what I'm observing, but there are countless number of images in my head. In the past, I shied away from showing my influences because I thought it would invite comparison. If it were a contest, one is liable to lose. Both of my parents were photographers, so it didn't occur to me to be one myself. I felt it would have been redundant. When my mom died and my dad became an actor, I missed having pictures around me. I realize it sounds silly, but I felt as if they were proof of my existence. Does that ring a bell? I started making scrapbooks with snapshots I'd taken. It was my favorite thing to do in life. Early in my career, I was told by an art director, "You're not as good as your mother." I was, of course, devastated until I woke up one morning, it was actually 2 years later, thinking, wait a minute, nobody's as good as my mother. I think I can live with that. I don't think it's possible not to be influenced by one's mother, but there are other photographers whose work is much more reminiscent of hers than mine. I want to show you a few of my pictures from different bodies of work and the photographs, paintings, and film stills that informed them. So if you're all familiar with Lartigue, who photographed during World War I in Paris, and this is what I did for the Village Voice in the 80s. I worked for the Voice for 10 years and eventually published a book called On the Street. I was doing style. This was the band The Clash that was in town in 1981 doing concerts. And I just happened to run into them. They were waiting to be extras in a Martin Scorsese film. Mostly I would stop and ask people for their permission, but occasionally things were just too good the way they were to let it go by. These folks had a shop on 8th Street and their dog was their logo. And this was Madonna in 1983, just walking down the street. When I stopped her, she said, "You work for the Village Voice? That's funny. They're reviewing my first single this week." Which was, can anybody answer? Do you remember? Everybody. No, everybody. After my tenure at the Voice, or actually sort of during the time that I was getting ready to leave, I did this story. I got in a taxi cab one night. I thought it would be a great fashion story. Well, here's Bill Brandt. And then this is my picture of a prostitute in the Lincoln Tunnel neighborhood in 1991. I was breaking every photographic rule in the book that I knew of, pushing film and developing it way too long, available light at night, completely out of control, with motion. But these are some of the most romantic pictures I've ever made. And I think the voice actually was so politically correct at the time that it was too edgy for them. They said that they thought the images were sexist towards women. And I was like, I completely didn't understand that. Although this one really gives me the creeps. After studying with Richard Avedon in 1992, I started this project. I'm glad I didn't show you what I did for Avedon. That was pretty naked. Here's my mom's picture. And this is Anderson Cooper. All these years ago. And here's how it influenced me. This is in the Museum of Modern Art. And they purchased 2 pieces, and I thought, okay, I can stop photographing now that I'm in the museum, right? But then I went to an opening one night, and people were congratulating me as I walked out. And I was like, for what? And it opened the new acquisitions show, so I was pretty thrilled. They're such classic expressions, but I was really thinking about nature and nurture at the time, and this kid was adopted and absolutely gorgeous, and I was thinking about, you know, who are these people? What are they going to turn out like? And I've followed many of them. I went back when they were 17, and they're now 21 and 22. And eventually, after doing it for a year and a half, the mothers, brand new mothers would say to me, so what's he like? And I was, as though I would know, never having had one myself. That was the first time this guy ever laughed. His parents nearly fell over. And I was just making silly noises at him to get him to change his expressions. So Rites and Rituals is the longest story I've ever done. I think it's been since 2001, and I never get tired of it. So I go to events and I pull people aside and photograph them, not in the action of the parade or the contest. And August Sander is a big favorite of mine. He just wanted to photograph everybody that was German at the time. And here's his twins called Country Girls. And I don't know the genesis of this one. I don't know the title or the year. My mom's version, which I trust you all know. And my version, which was at a Civil War reenactment in Pennsylvania. And I wanted the women in the background so it did show some sort of context, not of the actual event, which was, battle, but, that it wasn't just them that were dressed up. And I said, are you sisters? And they said, no, just friends. And I said, what's your name, to the girl on the left? And she said, Emily. And I asked the other girl, and she said, Emily. So not twins, but, and then many years later, I went back, and 3 of the women in the background met their husband that weekend. Kind of magical. This is another version of my version of twins. This is from Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake, that amazing ballet. And we were just talking about Dan Winters. He's a wonderful editorial photographer now, but he's also been an artist, and he used to be on this coast, he's now on the West Coast. He's just published a book, but this is from his very early work. And I've always loved this picture. I thought that's so brilliant to see from that point of view. And then I was in Cuba, having wandered into a ballet class, and this woman was flirting with her boyfriend at the window, and they let us in, no problem. And this girl was struggling to learn ballet, and her best friends were trying to stretch her out more than she could possibly. So the only way to capture those amazing legs and that painful expression was this way. This is, I think we lost something else in front of this. But anyway, this is Sicily, Easter week. Same thing here. And Polish scouts. And the Puerto Rican Day Parade. The great thing about New York is you never have to leave, and you still have one world. And Irish dance in Staten Island. So I actually credit Avedon with having taught me a love of theater, even though half my family has always been in the theater. But it was through him that I really started going a lot here in New York. I've always loved this picture of Marilyn, and it did never occur to me that, even though he was my mentor, that none of my work looks remotely like his. And I think that's on purpose. I think it's just too scary. But I did get to photograph Ed Harris in a show called Rex, spelled W-R-E-C-K-S. It's a Neil LaBute play, and it's a one-man show, and it's absolutely exquisite. If he ever does it again, I really recommend it. He's amazing. So the theory behind this whole project was that I was photographing actors in costume out of the context of the play. And I wanted to do that to show that in some ways they're every bit as, quote, normal as the rest of us. And I knew I was onto something because when I brought people out onto the street, they would flip out. Like, it was a whole different thing than standing at the stage door and waiting for them to sign your playbill. Like, people would freak out that these fictional characters, in many cases, came to life. This is from the original Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Really fun to work with people this bright and people that know about being photographed, because they have all these wonderful ideas. This was a missed opportunity, I've got to say, because it was Schubert Alley on a Sunday afternoon at 2:45, and Fred, the male lizard, came out of the stage door with a transistor radio listening to the ball game. And I was like, damn, I missed it. Sweeney Todd. And the amazing Alan Cumming, backstage opening night of the first production of Cabaret. We went back and we did it 16 years later, like 2 years ago. And he looks even more, if that's possible. So Afterimages was actually inspired by a friend getting a Cocker Spaniel. He said to me a couple months into her puppyhood, I think we should do a picture of me as a Courbet. And I said, which Courbet? And he sent me 2 pictures of self-portrait with black dog. I don't know if I should have brought them, but anyway, the minute I saw those pictures, I thought, wow, what a fabulous idea. But I never intended it to get quite as literal as it did. So here's Cézanne's version of the peasant. And then my Owen after peasant. So when we first started, we had no idea that we were going to paint the subjects. And we knew that the backgrounds were already painted, but we didn't know we would paint the clothing. I'll just run right past that one. So I had a whole crew. I had, you know, a background person, a set person, a stylist, and actually a painter, thank God, on the set, because he's the one that taught me a lot about the perspective in paintings being different from the perspective in photography. So speak about going right into the eye of the storm. You know, I only tried to do something like the masters, that's all. But when you see them, they're larger than life. I mean, they're only, what, 4 feet tall, but still, because they're not full bodies, or many are not full bodies, like her hand is incredibly huge. It's distorted in the photograph, but incredibly huge. And you think you're looking at a painting, but you get close and there's actual veins and pores, and it just, nobody would have painted like that. This series, ironically, I did because I thought none of my work was sexy enough. I guess it was way too sexy for B&H. One of these amazing photographers that worked with the Ziegfeld Follies. I mean, I've looked all over for backdrops like that. It's just, I love this time. And I was looking for antique locations, Victorian houses. This woman lives in the Chelsea Hotel, and that's her place. So I got lucky every once in a while, but often I would style it and find the locations. I was definitely influenced by Wuthering Heights, this scene where Kathy's dying. I was thinking about it. We actually had another model dressed as a nurse. So I was talking to the girl, she's an actress, and I said, so you're sick. You just found out you're dying. And she did an amazing job. So this is a very new series. I don't know where it's going to go. We're talking about showing it in the fall up at my gallery schoolhouse in Cape Cod, but I'm not sure it'll be ready, so we might have to do something else for now. But they remind me of the Depression era photographs of Dorothea Lange. This is hers, and this is mine. And for a while, they were only obscured identities, but I don't think that is necessarily the rule. But it tends to make a photograph more iconic because it's less specific about who it's of. This was a lot funnier a little while ago. I still see him out there. So again, finding beauty in places where most people don't see it. And then these are what we all have to do. in the future. Thank you.